Hey friends, welcome back. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Gabe. And today we're coming at you in video from our home and having a conversation around this series that is going to be this entire summer around marriage and family. And our goal is to introduce you to some of the people that we respect who have been working in this field for a long time, who can help all of us be better in our marriages and also as parents.
Parents, absolutely. And we know that this has only escalated in the last couple of years when everyone found themselves at home full time in 2020. And the things that we were able to avoid or kind of dust under the rug all were exposed. And so we realized that we needed to grow in several areas, and we're still doing that. And then we started learning from other people who have gone before us, who are experts, teaching us a lot of things. So I'm so excited about this series. We're bringing the people who have poured into us to you, because we know that whatever we've been given, we pay that forward, and we're so excited about this series with you guys.
Yeah, so it's one of those series that we'd highly recommend. You share it with other couples, maybe your friends. You know, all of us struggle at moments with our marriage. We struggle with our parenting. We all feel insecure and like we don't quite have it figured out, and we sort of assume everybody else does. And I think that lie can get in the way of our growth. And so I think over the summer, it's going to be fun for us to all grow together and learn a lot. So I'm excited to introduce to you our guests today. We have Josh and Christi Straub, and they're the founders of an organization called Famous at Home, also authors of the same book, Famous at Home. They have a podcast by the same name, and they are leadership, marriage, and family coaches. And they help a lot of leaders, a lot of people like you, really think through and work through all the ways to be emotionally healthy within their relationships, especially in their home. So Josh and Christi, welcome to Rhythms for Life.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
this
thank
is
you.
fun.
It's an honor.
Yeah, so let's start with just how you got into this and the kind of work that you guys do. Because, I mean, you don't just do counseling. I feel like you're coaching company leaders. You're trying to help a lot of people think through emotional health. So tell us a little bit about that work.
Yeah. So it started really for us working with leaders, but we were, for us, it started in our own marriage. I'm trying to navigate how we actually talk about this, because we were working with families. I started working with juvenile delinquents early in my career, and my job was to get them to feel remorse for their victims. But what I learned early on was that I couldn't get them to feel remorse for their victims because nobody else had sat in their world and had remorse for them for the way that they were raised. And so every first session, I'd give them a feelings chart. And I really tried to enter into their world to help them understand what they were feeling. So I'm going to fast forward to our marriage. And we met in grad school, so we felt like we were pretty well set. I was 30 by the time we got married. She's 26. And our greatest opponent came into our marriage weighing 8 pounds and 1 ounce. Colic, acid reflux. Like, it was awful.
Awful.
And so, when you decide whether or not you're going to, parenting is the most guilt-ridden, shaming task on the planet. You can't be a parent for more than 5 seconds to realize that. You can't take them home from the hospital before you have to make a decision about whether or not you're going to immunize your child. We all know what that debate's like today. Do we co-sleep or not co-sleep? Do we breastfeed or bottle feed? Do we spank or not spank? Do we do time-ins or time-outs? Because now time-outs are it's just you feel exhausted. And so I remember going back into the research and looking at what really matters at the end of the day. When our kids are raised, when we have grandkids, what will have really mattered. And everything in the research led back to this idea of emotional safety. And that we, all of parenting research can be summed up into one conclusion, and that's that our kids become who we are. And so we started to see this not just in our own parenting, but also in leaders. This idea that when we focus on the emotions of our employees, of our coworkers, of those that we get to lead, that you build relationship in a way that really builds trust and helps you lead well. And so the idea of Famous at Home came from us seeing ethical and moral failures, people calling us because of these crises, whether it was in the military, whether it was in churches. And we were looking at this going, man, how can we prevent this from happening? How can we really start to pour in and go, let's help leaders so there's not that ripple down effect, and let's start preventing that.
Yeah, and I think you just nailed it right out of the gates when you talked about just the role of empathy, right, in anyone and everyone's story. We want to just jump to the behavior and the outcome of whether it's neglect or abuse, whatever that looks like, but acknowledging that and that person, those kids that you were counseling, feeling seen and known. and heard. Like that right there builds safety and trust.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I'm sure that informed you, because there's a lot of content out there now that helps really direct us to that, shepherding that heart, or hearing that story, or let's start with what happened before this to get us where we are today. And I think that, to me, I've learned even in our marriage or with our own kids, the older I get, the further I look back on their story. Does that make sense?
That's
like
wise.
even I'm learning right now that what happens in the first 2 months out of the womb, that attachment is so profound. I wouldn't have thought that, when I was 26 with, or 28 with like 3 kids and just trying to keep it together. Like, kids are resilient. Right. Well, the truth is those early months are so formative in exponential ways beyond even the decade that follows.
Yeah. And I think we're learning even more about that.
Yeah.
And this idea that, for us, what we have found is that, because we all have a chase, right? So it's like when you have those early years, we're wounded in some way, right? And so, like you said earlier, like we all have insecurities in our marriage. We all have insecurities in how we parent. We think everybody else is doing it well, but it's like, wait a minute. And so often we try to hide those insecurities by chasing the affirmations of the world, by chasing the things that give us significance. And what we find over and over again is that when we really press in to home, that's the idea of being famous at home, that you can show up differently in whatever God's called you to, because I show up differently when Christi blesses me going out the door versus when it's like, how soon are you going to be home? How long you gone? I got the kid, right? It's like, I show up differently in how I go out into the world.
Yeah.
So Christi, I know you guys have 3 children, and there was a little gap between the second and the third. Talk a little bit about
a big gap.
And that was intentional because you were processing some of this, because you jumped in, as he said, like it was hard at first. And I know a lot of people listening and watching this, they feel that as well. So what was that like for you to go through this journey and learn, like, there's some things we're going to have to change?
Oh, well, and I could go back and I can remember, like, I could put myself back there right now, where I had our son is our oldest, and he was difficult. And everyone was like, I promise this is not a normal experience. Like, this is difficult. And so we signed up to do it again, and we get pregnant with our daughter, Kennedy, and she came and she was worse. And that's where I hit what I call the bottom rung of life, where I didn't even know who I was anymore. I remember someone dropped a pot in the kitchen and I just burst into tears. I was short with my husband. I was snappy with the kids. And I realized I was showing them the worst version of me that I'd ever been. And it took Josh coming in one day. I really can remember it like it was yesterday. I'm in the kitchen. I'm in, my mom uniform of my baggy sweatpants, college volleyball t-shirt. My hair's in a ponytail, no makeup on. And I'm spackled in banana and pureed sweet potato because we were teaching our daughter to eat solid foods. And he comes wafting in after a day of working. Yeah, like, okay, this is
sauntering in, wafting.
No, but he wafted in, but it was like this. He'd been working at a coffee shop, right? So it was like this latte,
Zen moment.
And I'm like, haven't talked to someone who knows how to tie their shoes in days. And so I just, we always talk about the story I'm telling myself, right? In marriage, in any relationship. So the story I'm telling myself is he has had this awesome day at a coffee shop. He's so pumped about all these projects that he's working on and great people he's met with. And here I am left at home, and I felt left behind. I felt alone. And in the moment, whenever we're attacked, we often throw arrows back. And so my arrow that I just shot back was, why don't you ever ask me about my heart? And I said it, and then just the tears started flowing. And I don't even know where it came from, because I realized in that moment, I didn't know how I was. Like, I didn't know how lost that I had become.
And I think it's important too to say that you were sick all day, every day for the first 5 months of both pregnancies. You threw your back out for 3 weeks in the middle of that, like, and had a porta potty right next to the bed. Like, there's so much more than just having colic and acid. Like, there was.
It was this.
Physical exhaustion.
I had this back injury that I'd had for 17 years, and so I couldn't carry our babies. I couldn't lift them in and out of their cribs. I couldn't put them in and out of their car seat. So when he'd leave, I was literally stuck at home. Like, I couldn't go anywhere. And it was just this compounding effect. And we all have these stories of.
But I love that you said that. I see that as a cry for help. Like, hello.
Oh.
And so important. Like, that's vital. Like, if you can't kind of name that immediately, right?
And
otherwise,
and that's the thing. Yes.
It will be a seed of resentment that becomes bitterness, and then it becomes like, oh, it must be so nice to go to the coffee shop.
And that's
that's exactly
exactly what I
happened.
was feeling. Like, this must be so nice for you. But I realized I couldn't name it. Like, it's exactly what you said. I couldn't have told you that I felt so lost and that no one was inquiring of my heart. And so that took us on this journey of, as he's writing about emotional safety and raising our kids, and I'm at home losing it and lost. And so we went down this journey ourselves, and that's why we talk about this and why it matters so much.
The cool part is and I don't know if we'll have time, but the redemption story of the way Micah came into the world, our 2 years.
Yeah. So we have 9, 7, and almost 2. And I think in those years, in our gap years, it's where the Lord did a deep healing work, not just in me, but in our relationship and in my story, like going back to where were these wounds seated and why am I struggling so much to even communicate to you how I'm feeling? Yeah. And what we find with so many, especially moms, like I'll speak to the moms, they're anxious, they're struggling with depression and like deep sadness, loss of purpose, loss of identity. They don't even know who they are. Yeah. And so it's a place where I think almost you get crippled. Like, where do you go from here? Right. Like, how do I get out of this? And we talk about being on the bottom rung. I mean, that first rung that I grabbed was going back to like a feelings chart, starting to label a feeling. And I know that sounds so simple and basic, but that's where really the beginnings of emotional intelligence begin. And we wrote a kids book called What Am I Feeling? And we did that partially for kids and partially for the adults that love them, because we had told all the time, like, I have this in my closet so that I can tell my husband how I'm feeling. Right. I'm like, I get it.
Like,
it was on our fridge.
It's not just for the kids.
It is not just for the kids.
Right, how many feelings are on the feelings chart you use? Well, we've seen the 8, the 16. Okay. What is it?
Well, we have 9 on that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it was like for 4 to 8 year olds, but
we could go.
I feel like a 9 is good. Like, less options.
The less, the better.
When you see like the whole list, you're like, angry, afraid.
Yes.
And I think, but like, it starts to organize our world. And that's what it did for me. It started to organize my world. And I started to be able to communicate in words to Josh, to friends, even to counselors, like, this is where I'm at. And I don't really know what to do with that. And that's okay. Yeah. But we can get you to that place, and then the Lord will put the people in your step, you know, for the next layer almost.
I love what you said about where women are right now, and where you were, where I've been, where I can go quickly if I'm not, if there's not some guardrails there. Yeah. And part of that is so much isolation, right? Yeah. So that anxiety just escalates, or the depression, or the like, I must be the only one who's facing this. And so in your head, it just grows and grows and grows. And you think that your spouse is supposed to be able to help you fully process that. And while they do, great. You do awesome, babe. You're really good.
I'm awesome at that.
I realized that part of my healing journey went beyond him, obviously. And even me just trying to do more for the kids and be better and, you know, more resilient, but more going outside of that and going, I need to be vulnerable with the friends who don't have to stay, and really make myself lead with vulnerability in those places, and realize, oh, wow, there's some other women just like me, you know, on the front lines of their home, feeling the same level of failure and exhaustion, and going, oh, wait, we can actually over each other, like, call out life or truth and go, like, I know you feel that way, I feel that way, but here's what I see in you, you know?
And I like you better because I just saw the real you. Yeah. Here's the thing, like, you use a feeling word, and you'll notice, we just did it the other day, we were having a conversation, and he said, you know, I feel brave. And I was like, my whole heart just leaned in. You can't help it. Whereas when we're throwing up these imposters, which is what we function in a lot of the time until we can dig in to the deeper layers of ourselves and communicate them to the people we love, we show up as imposters. And I can't have a relationship with an imposter. So if you feel like at home, you're listening to this and it's like, I just feel like I'm not connected, maybe to my spouse, maybe to my kids, maybe in relationship with friends, it's likely because these imposters are functioning for you. And and that's not a shame thing. Like, they've gotten us to where we are. They've helped us. But in order to connect and to
Right.
truly be known in relationship, and I think that's the fear we all have, is if they really know me, they'll
Yeah.
leave.
Yeah.
But what you'll find is when you're real, there's this true, like, I see you, Rebecca. Like,
That
I know
famous
you.
Quote, you too, I thought I was the only
Yeah.
one, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
how friendship is
Yeah.
forged.
And when you talk about imposters, I know for people, maybe they're hearing that language for the first time. I mean, it's basically the idea of presenting a certain front
Yeah.
that you think people will love,
Yes.
or that makes you appear stronger or in a different way than maybe you're deeply feeling. And many times we operate out of that
Right.
23 hours out of the day.
And we
Yeah.
think that's true of us.
And we think it's who we
that's
are,
really who we
right.
are. But
Because it worked for us growing up. It was
Yes.
the thing that was rewarded.
Yeah.
That's that side of us that
Yeah.
got some affirmation, some
Yeah.
accolade. And so it became this like false self that we project in order to kind of be
Yeah.
kind of accepted as.
So Josh, I think men have a really hard time with this. And I know Rebecca, as she travels, speaks, talks to a lot of women. I mean, one of the greatest complaints that comes back all the time is my husband will not be vulnerable with me. And I think the husbands are sitting there hearing their wives say, will you please be more vulnerable? And they're kind of like, I don't even know what you mean by that. I don't even know
That's good.
how to do that.
Yeah.
What have you learned? I mean, you've counseled and coached a lot of people that are busy, successful career people that in every other chart in life, just nailing it. But when they come home, they're not famous.
Well, and that's
They're the
thing.
worst person.
And that's the thing that I hear. I can lead 100 people at work, but I come home and I have no idea how to lead my own family, right? And so I just want to start by saying, man, like, this is no shame. Like, a lot of us didn't grow up in homes where we learned how to do this. And so, number one, no shame. Number two, when you start talking about feelings with your spouse, it's awkward. If you've not ever done it, like, it feels awkward. I remember being invited to Joint Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg a number of years ago to speak on emotional safety to guys who were trained to capture or kill. That's their job.
Yeah.
And I had to pull out all my scripture. It was only research. So, I mean, I was more nervous than I've ever been to speak anywhere. But it resonated. And now I speak to Joint Special Operations Command all the time because what I learned is the very thing that they're trained to turn off to survive on the battlefield is what they have to turn back on to survive when they get back home. And that's not just military men. That's all of us as men. That in order for us to truly, like, the Bible says to guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Well, when we get married, we become one flesh. Like, we have one marital heart to guard. And if I'm going to fight for Christi, I've got to know what's going on in her heart more than what's going on between the two of us. And so when she was talking earlier about her, when I came wafting in with, it was right around that time that John Townsend, who's been a mentor and friend of ours for many years, he said to Christi, he said, if you let Josh just come to this leadership retreat for a week, 10 years from now, you'll be so grateful you did. Like, just let him come. And it's in the middle of all this going
Like,
on,
great.
right?
She's like, yeah.
So like a
Cool.
week later,
So he's
I
leaving
leave.
for another week,
I
right?
leave.
Yeah.
But what I learned there was that the greatest leaders of men, like the greatest leaders, they can do not just content-based conversation, but process-based conversation. So it's not just about facts. Like, this is neurobiological research among Forbes 500 leaders, you name it, that it's about process, the process, the feelings-based. And so I came home to Christi and I was like, honey, like, I can't be a great leader until I first do this with you. And so we started implementing this thing that we do with everybody we coach. We put it in the book. It's kind of this core thing of what we do, and that's 15 minutes a day. And I come home where instead of doing a high and a low for the day, I ask her, because she said her main complaint was, honey, why don't you ever ask me about what's on my heart? And so for me to sit down and go, what was one positive emotion you felt today? Tell me about that. And then what was one uncomfortable feeling that you had today? And let me enter into that. Because until we get beyond, you think of it as peeling back a layer. Like, when we've got busy kids, when we got sports events, when we got running, we talk about the business of the day, but we never truly get into the heart.
Right.
And the way for me as a husband to guard my wife's heart is to know what's going on in it.
Yeah.
And so then we just flip that and say, listen, like, it's going to be awkward at first. You don't have to sit down across the table and stare each other in the eye and do this. You can do it while you're unloading the dishwasher. And then, like, the other thing too is don't try to fix it. Like, just listen. We have found that in our own marriage, it comes back to the simplicity of, like, just simply listening without trying to fix each other.
And
you
so
know?
then you do the same in the 15
And then I
minutes?
do the same, yeah. And so, and a lot of times it lasts 2 to 3 minutes. It's not
Yeah.
even 15. But there's been times where it's lasted 2 hours. But if she would say to me, hey, sweetie, can we sit tonight and talk for 2 hours about our emotions? I'd be like, yeah, there's a game on, right? Like, not
No
doing
way.
it.
I got to mow the grass again.
But
Yeah.
because we created the space for it, it
Right.
allowed for those opportunities to happen. And they were game-changing discussions in our marriage.
Yeah, it's
you know?
back to that mental health is not a theory, it's a practice. And
Yeah,
so you're just
so good.
practicing
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, baby steps, right? For a
Yeah.
lot of people listening, they're like, okay, I think I can practice this. If
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
15 minutes and it's like 2 questions and we can both take
Yes.
turns, let me write those questions down.
Yeah.
Like, you know, because that can be the most intimidating part is how do we begin?
Right.
Yes.
And am I just going to sit there like a deer in headlights and
Yes.
have no idea? And I would say for Gabe and I, years ago, I grew up in, my father was a chronic oversharer, which is rare. Now that I'm, now that I'm older, I realize how rare that was, but I am a lot like him. And so he was very in touch with his emotions. And so I just assumed Gabe would be just like that.
No, that was not me.
Yeah. And I was like, why don't you know how you feel? I'd be like, I feel like I could tell you exactly how you feel. And
I could
why
write
you
it in an
feel.
essay
Yeah.
or like, how do you
Right.
need it? Yeah.
Right. And so I think for a while,
I had a counselor one time tell me that he talking to me was like talking to an Excel sheet.
Excel spreadsheet.
It's like facts, like you were just saying.
Wow,
An
yeah.
ability to process
Yes.
and connect head and heart, just staying in
Yes.
the head.
Which is
Yeah.
what's helped you succeed in life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And
You
so-
that becomes an imposter though,
Yes.
right? Of
Yeah.
just achievement and everything's right. I
Right.
don't have any issues, no weaknesses.
Yeah. Or
and-
if we fix this and this, then this will be okay. We don't really need to go under the hood much more than
Right.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
right.
Because we're functioning well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that
It's-
journey for us has been a huge part of our growth in the I
Yeah.
mean, we're in 25 years of marriage right now, but it's probably the last 5.
I would say, yeah.
We've been able to really push into this area.
I would say year 19, something kind of erupted in me. It was kind of one of those moments like, why don't you ask me about my heart? But something happened in year 19 that probably should have happened in year 1, 3, 5. I don't know. But I just found that I had this kind of pent up frustration toward him and his inability to connect with me in that emotional place, knowing full well that he had tried. But on his end, shame was making him feel like I feel
Yes,
intimidated
that's
by
so
her.
good.
And I
That's
think
so
this
good.
happens
So
for a
good.
lot of men. I feel intimidated by my wife who's like journaled for hours for the last week.
Yeah.
She's got everything dialed. And if we meet, she's going to like really
Yes.
school
Yeah,
me
I'm
on
gonna get nailed there.
yeah. And so I think that created more of a tension there because all I wanted was him to just be honest and like, why won't you be just honest? And I think him going, I kind of want to, but I feel a little scared of you. And so just acknowledging that at that point in our marriage
so real.
shifted to where it became a practice. Like, and there still have been moments since then where he'll say something and then I don't just listen. Sometimes I'm like, oh, and he goes, and this is why I don't want to tell you. you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So just for
Yeah,
those who
yeah.
are going to give this a chance, like
Yeah.
women, please do not react and learn from me the hard way. Like when men are starting to feel that vulnerability and that safety that you're
Yeah.
talking about, then we start to really bond in a way that allows for our kids to now
Yeah.
model that. And I want to talk about our kids
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the famous at home concept is obviously that when you come home, it's not only about the marriage, it's about the children. And
Yeah.
you guys have been on this journey now for several years. Give us a little vision of like what starts to happen when you do put this energy into the home. And is it possible for somebody who's working a full career, they're out of the house,
Yeah.
and 9 to 5 or whatever it is, that they're playing sports, all this is going on. How does a family cultivate that sense of authenticity and emotional health in the home?
Well, we're on the Rhythms for Life podcast, so rhythms
Yeah.
is a huge part of it. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to create rhythms, and I know you guys talk about this, but it really starts with Sabbath. It really does. We've got to learn how to rest. We've got to learn how to shut it off. God did that in the very beginning of creation. At the end of every day, He celebrated the good. And I think so often we look at the end of a day and go, we didn't have enough time for this. We didn't have enough time for that. And so even just entering into your kids' world at the end of a day to celebrate what good happened today, and to voice that, to put that into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Because I think so often our voice, the power of the life and death are on the tongue.
Yeah.
And we're voicing what we didn't get done, what went wrong. And it's like, no, let's voice the good. And it's not in a fake way. I think we don't celebrate well,
Yeah.
And so for us.
And I'd say
okay.
too, like for all the parents, like I think we're so hypercritical of ourselves as parents that criticism doesn't just go internal, it then comes out at our kids. And so even the times we are at home with them, it becomes this like, you should, we've got to, that needs to be picked up. We got to do like better, better, better. And I think this is where we get on this treadmill of exhaustion and burnout and also disconnection in relationship because the kids don't really trust you because you're just coming at them with more critique, really.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about Famous at Home, 15 minutes with your spouse, we do 20 minutes of command view time with your kids. So whatever
And
that
do you do that
looks
with
like.
all of them at once or one-on-one?
Well,
Or how does
and that's a
go?
great question, because you might be listening to this. You're like, you have 12 kids, and you're like, how do I do 20 minutes a day with my kids?
Bless you.
And this comes out of research. Dr. Stanley Greenspan did research on, especially in infants. And you talked earlier about like the first 2 months. Like this is especially powerful in the infant years. Like even just getting that 20 minutes, the eye contact. Like in a world of screens,
Yeah.
we need to be in eye contact with our kids. But 20 minutes of command-free time a day, where you enter their world. You don't command the play. You don't you enter into their world and do what they want to do. It's gold for a child's brain and for their attachment. And so we just take this to every area of life. It doesn't matter what age your kids are at. And so what we say is that if we can do that with each child a day, that's great. But when you have multiple kids, really start thinking about which one do I, like this morning even, like we noticed, Christy noticed, like one of our kids is like, you can tell longing for attention, like needs that one-on-one time, especially with mom.
But it comes out in misbehavior. It comes actually out in pushing you away, like this resentment. And I remember, I mean, I know, I wouldn't say it's our daughter, but the Holy Spirit like literally dropped in my spirit one day, do not douse her, dose her. And I was like, douse her, what does that even mean? And I realized, I think so often as parents, we want to be like, we're going to take you on a trip, or we're going to go do like a full mom and daughter day. And it's like, just dose her, just 20 minutes, like just be with her and eye to eye. Like really that bonding form is like left eye to left eye. And if we can just spend that time with our kids and we're not, it's not taking from us really. It's just taking from us like maybe the boredom of playing chutes and ladders with someone who doesn't know which way is up and which way is down. So
when you talk about like an injured neuron in the brain can grow 2 millimeters a day, and it's through practice. And so it's more effective to practice piano 15 minutes a day than once a week for 90 minutes.
Yes,
like your brain actually can't receive and process that and heal when it's just these inconsistent spurts, right?
And the reason that emotional safety is so huge in kids is because of that brain, right? So a child comes in and they're emotionally overwhelmed, and they can't name it because they don't know how to name it, right? They're just feeling it. I mean, we as adults struggle naming it, but that amygdala is going off, and when the amygdala goes off, our ability as parents to enter into their world to help calm their brain is what triggers the prefrontal cortex to help them to think straight, because that part of the brain is shut down when the amygdala amygdala is going off, and so, which is out of the limbic system. And so the reason that emotional safety is so huge is because when we as parents can calm our kids' brain when they're in emotional overwhelm, it triggers the higher functioning parts of the brain known for social control, self-control, emotion regulation, cognitive flexibility. And it's all of those things that lead to every outcome we desire in our kids, right? And so, I mean, and then just real quickly, I'm just going to give the biblical reference to that, because I think that Apostle Paul understood the brain when he, in Philippians 4, said, the Lord is near, he's with us, right? Be anxious for nothing. And even before that, he said, let your gentleness be made known to all. And the word gentleness there means your power under control. You have power. You know what pushes your spouse's buttons. You know what pushes your kids' buttons. You have a power that you want to bring under control. Let your gentleness be made known in your home. The Lord is near. Be anxious for nothing. But by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, neuroscience shows that gratitude and anxiety don't coexist in the brain. So you're like, with thanksgiving, God, thank you for all these things. And the peace of God. So you're labeling, you're putting to words your emotions to God. A peace which surpasses all understanding, keeps your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And it's not until that point that Paul then writes from prison, where it's not a very nice place to be. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, pure, holy, excellent, anything praiseworthy, think on these things. He didn't write think on these things before he wrote be anxious for nothing.
Right.
I think he understood that when we're anxious, we can't think straight.
Right.
So therefore, everything we're practicing, the 15 minutes a day with your spouse, the 20 minutes with your kids, Paul is saying this in Philippians 4. Do this with God.
Yeah.
Do a prayer of examine where you sit with God and go, I'm anxious today about this, and here's where I feel, and you're labeling that. It writes your story, it integrates your brain.
Right.
And that's where us as parents, I believe in a finite way, God has designed us as parents to be able to enter into our kids' world, calm their brain, get them to think straight so that we get the outcomes we desire.
Right. And it's even like naming those requests, those prayers, that pain, whatever it is, with Thanksgiving.
With Thanksgiving.
Right? So that you're not staying in kind of that trauma, like that brainstem, like everything's terrible. I'm a terrible person. Look at us. Like we're doing everything wrong. It's like I feel inadequate, deeply inadequate, or I feel ill-equipped for the work. But you, thank you, Lord, that your strength is made perfect in my weakness. So it's kind of like that dual response to me is so unique. It's different than the world, right?
Yeah.
When he says, a peace I give, the world cannot give. It's because in the world, it's kind of like you will your way into the positive vibes, right? Versus going like, God, you've just already said that in this world you'll have trouble, but you've still overcome it. So even though it feels like trouble right now, I know the Thanksgiving is that you're overcoming
and
it.
that's the double meaning of famous at home. Like having our identity grounded. We're already famous in our heavenly, like he loves us so much. We love because he first loved us. And I think so often for us to be able to go into to experience his love for us, that's where all of this, like he's there to meet us in all of that. He's there to meet our kids in all of that. That's what compels us to go love other people.
Yeah.
So,
This is so encouraging, such a great conversation, just getting to hear your own personal journey and your story, but now how you're helping so many other people in the area that I think God wants us to have success. He wants our homes to be this beautiful space, this safe place in this world for our kids to develop. And so many of us are just doing the best we can, like just trying to get by. But these insights, I mean, just listening to you describe the power of those 20 minutes, I mean, that's a powerful thing to understand, that the results you really want to see in your children aren't going to necessarily come from you telling them everything they did wrong and coaching them up in every spot, but like this being present with them is going to transform the relationship and the outcomes.
There's a phrase that we use in the book. It's in the music world, an overnight success, a decade in the making, right? It's like we see
10,000 hours.
It's like at the end of the day, what feels like exhaustion as a mom in the home day in and day out, you're building something. You are a decade from now, you're going to see the fruit of that. And it's hard, but that's why you said surround yourself with people who can journey with you. That's what it's about.
And in the book, you've got 7 practices, and we've talked about a couple of them. If you had to just highlight for somebody who's new to this whole conversation of emotional safety, what are kind of the top 3 things you would recommend they just start with?
Do you want to do that?
I would say talk about emotion. So we talk about making emotion language just a practice in your home. A practice is a great word because it's not, typically most of us did not grow up in a home where that is true. Or you grew up in a home where certain emotions were celebrated and other ones were shut down, punished, dismissed, whatever. And that's just to be curious about that for yourself first, because like there are things that trigger me, like my kids do or Josh does, and it triggers me. And instead of feeling ashamed about that, it's get curious, like, I wonder why that is. I wonder why every time they do that, I get so angry. And it leads back to our story, but we don't have to have the answers. And I think that you've said a couple things that I just want to highlight. A lot of this, I think we come in thinking there's this great expectation or demand on us with our, in marriage, like when we're sitting down to do 15 minutes, when you're with our kids. And I think that God is so much more gracious to us than we are to ourselves. He's just saying, be with and be yourself. Like take off your cloak, take off these layers. And it's actually, you don't need to fix it. You don't even have to have a good answer for your kids' questions. You don't have a great answer for your spouse's issue that they're going through at work right now. It's just be with and take off your layers. And I think that is the beginnings of emotional safety. And I think if we can even just harness like the freedom that God has for us in that, and Josh will talk about this all the time, it just takes 3 out of 5? 2 out of 5.
2 out of 5 times.
Okay, that's even better.
Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, you say it.
Okay.
Because that's
so
way
this
better.
idea of emotional safety. So this is kind of the guilt-free drop. So John Gottman, who's like the preeminent marital researcher, he also did research on emotion coaching kids. And what he found is that even if you get emotional safety right just 2 out of 5 times, you can still get the outcomes you desire in your kids. Like Shaq shot better than 40% from the free throw line, right? Like we can do this. And the reason is because you're going to yell, you're going to say things you regret, you're human, you're going to mess up.
Yeah.
But the research says a word called repair is the ultimate of relationships. Well, the Bible calls it forgiveness, and Jesus tells us to practice it a lot.
Yeah.
So when we enter into our child's world and we apologize for where we've been wrong and we ask them how we can make it right, what we do is we model for our kids that we're not perfect. We show them we don't expect them to be, and we model for them how to make it right. And Jeannie Cunnion, who's a friend of ours, she even told us, she's like, what if you take your kids to the cross in that moment with you? Like even in some of those moments where you go, I'm going to pray to Jesus to forgive me for this. Would you mind if you prayed with me to do that? And you're modeling for your kids that you have to go to the cross too. Like, and it's just such a beautiful, to me, we're going to mess up, but even research shows it's okay.
Yeah.
Like when you mess up, just as long as we make it right.
Yeah. That's good.
Well, we're so thankful for you guys taking the time to help pour into all of us, as well as to so many marriages, families that are listening right now. And we're so appreciative of your work. This is their new book, Famous at Home. And we would fully endorse everybody taking this conversation to a more practical form, even for your family, and to read through this with your spouse, to make it a point of conversation. This summer, such a great time for us to all consider, what does it look like to reset our family? What are the new rhythms that we want to incorporate? How do we want to move back into the next school year and take advantage of these weeks that are pretty rare, where we get a little more time to be with family, to work on these relationships. So we're grateful for you being a part of this, and we're grateful for you as well.
Thanks for
being
having us.
with us.
Thank you.